Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to today's webinar, which is entitled Progress Report, What We've Learned and Useful Things to Make a Local Difference. It's a fantastic opportunity for us to share with you the learning and the work that's been undertaken in the project that we've been running with HMRC since across the spring and now into the end of July when we finish. And I know many of you engaged with this project's work in March when we held our 2 webinars, but it's fantastic for us to have today's opportunity to let you know what happened and what recommendations we're making for the future. So let's have the first slide then, please, Sophia. So here we are, welcome, progress report, what we've learned and useful things to make a local difference. You may remember that HMRC commissioned HEMSLs in November, December last year to run a relatively short project in the spring to work with 10 local areas and to run the national webinars. We were delighted at the end of that process to be extended to the end of July. And I'll be talking with you about what we did in that first project and in the small extension throughout today's session. So let's have a look at the webinar structure. It's just gone 10:30 and we're here until 12 o'clock today. And after the welcome, introduction and aim and purpose, we will go through an overview of the project so you fully understand the component parts. We'll look at the feedback, learning and key themes from the March webinars and the impact that we had on confidence. And then we'll be supporting the findings and learnings from the targeted work. So the 10 local authorities that we worked with initially and the 5 local authorities in the extension. And we've got case study input from Manchester, Birmingham, Barnet and Brent, which is brilliant. The recording for today's session, given it's a Zoom webinar, and it's important things I need to tell you about the Zoom webinar format. We will be sharing with you the recording and the slides straight after. We'll be issuing you with an online survey to evaluate today's session as well. I can see some of you are asking about mute and cameras. This is a Zoom webinar, which means we can't see or hear you, which has come as a great relief to Sharon, I can see. But if you do want to make a comment, ask a question, do use the chat. And I can see lots of you are already using the chat function. Our priority today is to give you as much information as possible and to share the fantastic progress and experiences of the 4 local areas of Manchester, Birmingham, Barnet and Brent. So do forgive us if we don't get to every comment or question because we will get to them after today if we don't have time in today's session. So very full program over the next 90 minutes. If you can't use the chat function, sometimes people have a problem with that. Do email us at info@hemsls or even bookings@hemsls.com and your comment and question will get to us, I promise. So once we've done the summary evaluation and close, that should be 12 o'clock and we can get off and get on with the rest of our day. Next slide then. That's it, our project. So we really wanted in this project to shine a spotlight on tax-free childcare because I think a lot of people have said to us that you've been busy doing other things or looking after other priorities, entitlements and other implementation. So it's important to give tax-free childcare its moment in the spotlight. But we're also really clear and focused that we felt clear and understandable information would make a big difference to everybody if they were going to relook at tax-free childcare. But there were lots of barriers that we thought. We'd read lots of the research that HMRC had completed with other partners, and we were keen to think about those barriers that had been identified and see what we could do to overcome those. And make the case for why we could all do more on tax-free childcare with some small adjustments or with some particular focus. But of course, we didn't want to do that to everybody. We wanted to do that with. So that's why it's been a project full of dialogue, discussion and debate in the webinars and out of those, but also in those 10 to 15, we often say target areas, which sounds a bit rude, but I think, you know, those areas where we've put investment, we've put support, and we've worked alongside those local authorities to think about tax-free childcare in those ways. So thank you to HMRC for commissioning that work and the project extension. In the next slide, we've got the overall project activities. So a project to consider how take-up could be increased in 10 targeted local areas across the UK through a local review and action planning process. So we developed a tool called the Take 5 tool. It had 5 areas, and it asked key questions about the current position and current work around tax-free childcare in those local areas, and what perhaps could or should be done to take an improvement in those 5 areas. What support could we offer as a team at Hempsall's, and what could the local authority do now? What could they do in the medium term, and what perhaps are longer term actions? So all of those processes with that targeted work ended up with a Take 5 document being completed, tracking the difference made in the short term, but also setting out the actions that could or should be done later. And that many of those, if not all of those plans, continue to this day. We also delivered 2 webinars. There was one for early years and childcare providers, and we delivered that twice in the same day, so a daytime session and a twilight session, mainly to support access by childminders, I have to say. And then one for local councils or areas, and as many people as we could find working with families. So we often call those family-facing professionals, and by that we mean health visitors, social workers, housing officers, children's centre staff, early help, childcare providers themselves, school teachers, job centre staff, a whole range of different, you know, if you regularly come into contact with families and could play even the smallest part in raising awareness about tax-free childcare, then you were able and welcome to attend that webinar. Now, those webinars were held in March, and then after that, we extended the programme to 5 more local authorities and ran an action learning programme, so online sessions to look at the key themes we discovered in the first part of the project, to work through ideas, solutions and planning with those 5 additional local authorities. All, of course, with a strong focus on information, awareness raising and support to take action. And those were our 3 watchwords really for this project. What information, what can we do in terms of what people understand, what they have access to? How does that information raise awareness and deepens understanding, and how does it break myths and misunderstandings and result in clear understanding about tax-free childcare? And then the third aspect was about behaviour change. Now, what actions can we actually take, which we were pretty sure would make a big difference? So that's where the action was. So if we look at the graph next, which is the webinars, one of the things that we were challenged to do in those webinars was to build confidence. So we took a measure at the beginning of those webinars from everybody that attended, what they thought their confidence was about all aspects of tax-free childcare at the beginning, and that's the green column. So you can see a score around the 4 mark, so 3.98, 4.32, 4.23. We split that between all respondents and providers and local authorities and councils and family-facing professionals. So the one on the left side shows the cumulative responses. So about 4.23 was the confidence level at the beginning of those webinars, and we raised that to 7.56, which was a 3.3 increase when people were scoring their confidence out of 10, which was brilliant because we had 2,500 people attended those 3 webinars, booked onto those webinars. And we had amazing engagement from 216 of the local authority areas across the UK, across England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, with a good cross-reference of all of those different roles that I outlined later. We didn't just measure on numbers. The next slide shows some of the typical comments that we received. There we go. Typical comments that we received from participants. So the information was clear, helpful and easy to follow, with something that they knew nothing or little about, and feel more confident and clear about where to signpost colleagues or parents or families to where further information or support might be available. Lots of people had heard about tax-free childcare, but didn't feel able to talk to families about that during their work. And again, an increased ability and awareness and confidence to answer questions about it if they were asked. All really good outcomes for us. I mean, even during the webinar, an early years and childcare provider had already contacted their local tax office and found their 11-digit number that they needed to register to become a provider able to accept tax-free childcare. So we could see clearly that action was happening right away. And then finally, in terms of other outcomes from the webinars, and this is some of the actions that people took. So some people said, you know, that we I'm going to say myths the busted, or we busted the myths. You know, we helped people to understand the explanations that could be used to share the learning, to translate what can be technical and complicated information into things to do and work with parents. We shared a whole range of documents and tools that could be shared with teams and colleagues, and since then HMRC have produced even more in the Welsh language too. And I've said at the beginning actually today that the slides will be available for you after today, but actually they'll also be available translated into the Welsh language also. So good clarification and answers to technical questions. We issued a Q&A document as a response to those webinars too. And fresh ideas, reminders to support parents to pay for childcare. And we also signposted the social media assets that have been provided and produced by HMRC for us all to use. And one of the case studies that we used was the Employers for Childcare service, who were there for parents to be signposted to for more support. Now, you might have missed that webinar. You might have attended it and want to revisit it. On the bottom of this slide, the link is there as to where you can find the recording for that webinar and all of the assets and the QA document. And I'd recommend that you do that. People are still using that resource quite well. If you don't, not able to access the link, it's very easily found if you Google foundation years, hemp sorts, HMRC or tax-free childcare. It usually comes up the top of your Google search. So I definitely recommend that you do that. Useful asset to revisit or to share for the first time. So the webinars were as impactful as we could ever have imagined. But of course, a key second aspect of the project was to work with 10 targeted areas. And that's where Barbara, my colleague, is going to take us through what happened with that and introduce this theme and the case studies with the 4 local authorities today. Good morning, Barbara. Oh, I can't hear you, I'm afraid.
Sorry, technology escapes me today. I do apologise. Good morning, James. Good morning, everybody. So as James says, you know, feedback from the webinars, which was hugely positive, but also feedback from our targeted areas. Not really targeted areas, are kind of initial partners on this journey. To select those initial partners, we worked with HMRC data. We selected 9 local council areas from across the United Kingdom and worked with colleagues in Northern Ireland. And the areas that we chose, the 9 areas that we chose, were those with lower take-up rates and the capacity or potential to increase take-up rate, including those areas with higher populations. But it was also important that the areas had the ability and capacity to work with us, our advisors, through the process. And the feedback that we got from the areas that we worked with were first and foremost a timely project, and I think we'll come back to this as a theme throughout the day. Probably never a better time to be discussing help to support costs of childcare. It was an ideal opportunity, time for a local focus. We are all so busy, so many different priorities, and to have the permission perhaps to take time out to consider tax-free childcare and how we support its take-up was really, really beneficial. And it was very useful to create an action plan to ensure that focus continues. It's not just a one-off project, but the focus continues as we move forwards. So if we look a bit at the document that we used to support this process, it was the Take 5 document, and it's a self-review form. We developed it as a self-review and action planning process tool to use in the project. We also had advisors who supported the areas to work through the tool to identify their starting points and things that can be done locally to raise awareness, build understanding, and to motivate changed behaviours. So, for example, provide parents signing up and providers enabling signing up for tax-free childcare. And Take 5 focused on 5 key areas. Strategic planning, so the extent to which there was senior management buy-in and commitment to increasing tax-free childcare. Provider capability and capacity. And here we were looking at the ability of early years and childcare providers to promote tax-free childcare take-up and the level of understanding of the financial benefits to families and to providers' businesses, to the sustainability of the business. We were here thinking about the extent to which providers have effective tools, skills and information to promote tax-free childcare. Messaging was around the extent to which information about tax-free childcare was up to date, clear and accessible for all, including families, parents, family-facing professionals, local authorities and other key stakeholders. Reaching and engaging was the extent to which all eligible families are reached with messages and supported to engage with or ultimately take up tax-free childcare, including easy to navigate customer journeys from start to finish. And the last area, processes, data and systems, were around how data was collected and analysed about tax-free childcare take-up and used to inform or drive actions and strategies. So on the next slide, we'll see that James mentioned pre-surveys in the webinars. We also had a pre-support self-complete survey as part of the Take 5 document. And the areas were asked to assess their confidence levels about tax-free childcare in this pre-support survey, and then again post-support. And ratings range from very low, low, okay, high and very high. And initially 4 areas reported low scores, so 5 or below. All of the areas that we worked with reported confidence levels increasing after completing the project. And 2 of these reported that they increased from low to okay, which is still a good increase. One of the areas reported that their confidence had increased within the immediate team. However, they reported that the local authority still thinks that there's more to share with colleagues in early years, schools and children's services. And that's why the action plan is so important. We have short, medium and long-term actions to increase and to sustain knowledge, awareness and take-up of tax-free childcare. And in the self-review, 2 local authorities reported confidence at the end of the programme as either high or very high. Average scores, and James discussed these from the webinars, but the average scores from our initial 9 areas plus Northern Ireland increased from 4.3 in the pre-support survey to 6.2 post-support as a result of engagement in the project, which was fantastic. So using the Take 5 review and action planning process tool, the HEMSOS advisors supported participating areas in part 1 of the project, which was to work through the sections in a series of mainly online and one face-to-face meeting. Reviews enabled local authority teams to identify their starting points and their confidence levels in promoting tax-free childcare. And the meetings were held during the period of March to May 2022, offering support and challenge to identify actions that could be taken locally to raise awareness, build understanding, and motivate change in behaviours. For example, partners and providers playing their part in promoting tax-free childcare and enabling parents to sign up for it and to use it. In addition to the one-to-one meetings, either virtual or face-to-face, there were 3 online action learning sets, which were provided to support peer-to-peer discussion to assist these local areas with planning and to share different ideas and approaches. And then at the end of the project, each area completed the action plan and submitted a final copy at the end of May 2022. HMRC then commissioned an additional project, which has enabled us to share learning from our initial project today, but also allowing us to work through an action learning set programme with an additional 5 local authority areas in June and July of this year. So current work. The local authorities were asked if they wished to participate and completed an expression of interest. EOIs were then cross-referenced with HMRC data, and 5 areas were invited to participate, again based on lower take-up rates and capacity or potential to increase those take-up rates, including those with higher populations and, importantly, the ability and capacity to work with our advisors through the action learning set process. This time round, currently, the ALS programme has been used to review and action the process tool, the Take 5 tool, and have been facilitated by advisors who have been working to support local authorities to work through the tool and the different points, and thinking about things that can be done locally to raise awareness, build understanding, and again, motivating those changed behaviours. All of the local authorities that are participating in this part 2 of the project in the action learning set approach are required to return the completed Take 5 by the end of this month, so July 2022. But across both projects, we can see that there has been an increased understanding of stakeholders and their needs. Better links to wider local authority strategies are being developed alongside an increased awareness of tax-free childcare by all stakeholders. There's been a new focus on school-aged children, so thinking about the full age range that tax-free childcare works with to support. And lots around updating websites, marketing strategies, and improving messages and signposting for families and providers, and a shift from generic messaging to a targeted approach for different audiences. And we'll look at some of these as we go through the rest of today. But in summary of all of this work, we've pulled together the outcomes into 3 main themes: a focused approach to stakeholder engagement, action plan to support providers to actively engage in the take-up of tax-free childcare, and strategies to support families to understand tax-free childcare and apply for it. And we're going to explore these 3 areas in a little more detail, but first we're going to hear from Kevin from Birmingham about their experience of working with us on this project. Thank you, Kevin.
Morning, everybody. I'm on strict orders to rattle through the presentation, so I won't spend too much time on it, but there's quite a bit of information that obviously you can take away from our experience. So next slide, please. So obviously the aim of the presentation is to give our perspective in terms of the Take 5 process, and it will cover the process, the benefits and the outcomes of using the Take 5 process in Birmingham. Next slide, please. Okay, so Birmingham context, just to give a bit of background, very little had happened since September 2017 when the scheme was rolled out, and obviously it was rolled out at the same time as 30 hours, so there was a lot of focus on that. I'm sure this will resonate with a lot of local authorities up and down the country. Take-up rates provided by Barbara were, as they say there, for 2021, families with accounts for just under 4,500, children actively using accounts just over 5,500, or just under 5,500, and 911 childcare providers. In terms of the childcare providers, obviously that's just over around 50%. So obviously, coming back to Barbara's point earlier, there's a lot of more potential for Birmingham, especially from a provider perspective, to sign up. And ultimately, the process forced us to do something, and something needed to happen. Next slide, please. This is just an overview in terms of where Birmingham, how Birmingham compared to, and just compared to the rest of the West Midlands, England and Great Britain year on year. Even though we can see the families improving year on year, we're still sort of under the West Midlands and the national sort of numbers. So obviously why we were targeted by Hempsels. Next slide, please. This is the same sort of trends in terms of children. So just give some context in terms of numbers of children that have actually accessed or been funded for a place through the scheme. Next slide, please. Okay, in terms of the process, so step one, and I suppose this is sort of learning from other work that we've done in the past. I couldn't just do this on my own, so I made sure to pull together appropriate officers from across my team and the wider service. So that included sufficiency and Triple E staff which come under my sort of area. But equally as well, importantly, we've got a group of early years consultants that support providers with business support right across the city. So we pulled that team in to support with the provider awareness. Step two, met with Barbara to talk through the project, and that was really positive. Step three, what we did immediately was set up a working group. First thing we needed to do was to review the current situation. But equally what we wanted to do, and again through experience, some of these things can sort of be long drawn out processes, doing strategies and actions plans, producing documents, and we don't actually do anything for months. So I wanted to make sure we sort of identified some quick wins, because we did know there were some. Obviously identify the medium and the long-term sort of objectives, and allocate actions immediately to the group members, including timelines. And then we set up regular update meetings, which we started from March, and we meet every month just to see sort of updates on progress. Next slide, please. Step four was actually completing the Take 5 documents and sending it to Hempsels, and we've used that as the basis of action plan and strategy for obvious reasons. The headings were really useful for us to review where we were, or where we are now, where do we need to be, and how we are going to get there. And the headings were really useful in terms of leadership and management, provider capacity, clear messaging, region engaging, and process data and systems, as Barbara's already touched on. Next slide, please. The outcomes of using the Take 5 process. So the quick wins, which we identified, we rolled out the provider survey in May and the parent survey, and there's some information around the results in future slides. Promoted the offer on BCC website, including signposting to childcare choices, promoted through social media, Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. We've updated our Triple E registration paperwork, asking a question of providers if they're signed up or not. So that gives us another intelligence, source of intelligence. We As well, we've sort of done a lot of work, like other local authorities, in the last 18 months on the 2-year-old offer, because our numbers are quite low. So a lot of the learning and processes and that we've got set up and sort of links in with other professionals and organisations, we've piggybacked on the back of that. So good examples of that in terms of quick wins were that we've been doing family-facing professional AAA awareness raising sessions, and we've added in a slide or two around tax-free childcare. So that is now has been rolled out for the last few months. So we're increasing that awareness with family-facing professionals. We've added tax-free childcare to our regular new AAA provider sessions. This is where our early years consultants team come in. They do a number of workshops, etc., for providers. So they've included a slide in their new provider workshops. And then what we're doing at the minute, and it's just been completed, is actually producing a specific business planning workshop on tax-free childcare. So they're all the quick wins. In terms of wider awareness and promotion at the same time, through our internal departmental newsletter, because obviously one of the opportunities was Birmingham City Council, one of the biggest employers in Birmingham. Let's get the message out there, because obviously there'll be staff employees that could actually benefit from this offer and may not be aware of it. Taking the opportunity and to discuss tax-free childcare, all opportunities, all professionals, embedding it into their sort of daily work. Birmingham Community Health Trust, we're working with them and they're promoting the offer within their newsletters and websites. And Birmingham Community Trust, Health Trust, are actually the contractor that deliver our children's services contract. So they're a big player. And then within Birmingham Early Years Networks, they're promoting it within their newsletters and on their websites. And we've sort of made contact with the Birmingham Chamber of Commerce as well to promoting their newsletters. Next slide, please. And then medium-term actions to review the results of the provider and parent surveys to inform our strategies moving forward. That was what it was key for us to understand what parents and providers, knew about the process. Developing, as I said earlier, the tax-free childcare session for providers, which will be delivered in September. Reviewing existing materials and resources. And replace with the latest updates that DfE have sent in the last few weeks. We'll be working with our council corporate communications team. We're working with them on EEE at the minute. It's a little bit stop and start, as you can imagine, because there's something called the Commonwealth Games going on in Birmingham at the minute, so all the resources are being focused on that. But we've got a foot in the door there, so we'll be looking to develop communication strategies and tax-free childcare with them. Big opportunity to actually raise awareness and promote the offering in all schools. Because obviously, picking up on Barbara's point, schools are where parents actually go right across the board, so that's a good avenue for us. And developing strategies with our family-facing professionals, children's centres, health visitors, etc., to raise awareness with families on a district level. And crucially, it's just an ongoing repeat messaging process. Next slide, please. The benefits of the process gave us much needed focus, gave us that opportunity to drill down on what works and what needs to happen to improve take-up, gave us that opportunity to review existing strategies and impact, especially when the data was published regarding parents and provider participation. The formats made the exercise a lot easier, because it was basically gave us the template and for us to sort of fill that in, which made life a lot easier for us. And I think that helped us get on with the quick win process quite quickly. Being part of the programme, sort of sharing ideas, etc. at the HEMSL's webinars has given us that focus time and has been really useful. Obviously, the opportunity, the timeliness opportunity is there, obviously, with parents experiencing the squeeze on finances. So hopefully this may support their decisions around paying for childcare moving forward. And equally as well, providers experiencing the squeeze on finances, you know, this is a crucial part of their sustainability, ongoing financial sustainability. And hopefully that will be the hook that engages more childcare providers. And ultimately, the scheme supports our local the local authority statutory childcare sufficiency duty. So everything obviously crosses over. Next slide, please. Just a quick overview of the headlines from the surveys. So the provider survey, the participation was really low. We extended the deadlines. We only had 223 responses. You can see the breakdown there, predominantly PVIs. In terms of the respondents, 150 were actually already registered, 71 weren't. So to a certain extent, it's the 71 responses that are quite crucial in terms of why they're not actually registered. Reasons for non-registration, high proportion, or 37 did not know about the scheme. So that's obviously a red flag in terms of awareness. I thought the scheme was for parents, carers on benefits. So that's a lack of understanding of what the scheme's about. And obviously a portion of parents are using childcare vouchers still. Support required, so knowing the potential benefits as a parent carer, that was a key one in terms of people's understanding and what does it mean for them. More information about providers that parents can use, so that was a key one there. Scheme awareness, word of mouth of parents, family members, friends, etc. Was a key one. Next slide, please. How easy was it to sign up? So very easy. Would you recommend the scheme? Yes. So that, I think in terms of these are positives, but these are people that have actually signed up to the scheme, a lot of them. Reasons for yes, no answers. So the scheme is a financial benefit, saves money. So obviously that's a key thing. What changes would you make? More funding. It was a higher rate or covering a wider age range. Improvement in scheme advertising. General improvements on functionality. This was an interesting one from a few individuals. Better information on how to use the system, so a video should be available. So that might be something HMRC may want to consider. And sort of positively, a high proportion of people were prepared to discuss further with us if we need to drill down. Next slide, please. I think I said the last one was the provider. It was actually parents, so apologies for that. So this is actually the provider survey. Very low again, 95 type of childcare provider across the board, PVIs again. Registered for tax-free childcare, so the majority of the respondents, so that's, you've obviously got to put the survey into context that most respondents were actually already signed up. So some of the figures could be a bit skewed. Reasons for not signing up, so that small proportion did not know about the offer. So again, that's about awareness. And equally, some providers, no demand from parents, obviously dependent on which area of the city that they sort of operate. But the positive thing is those that weren't registered were likely to register in the future. So that was quite positive. Next slide, please. In terms of how did providers find out about the scheme, so sort of a mixed bag there. Childcare Choices website came out higher, Birmingham City Council website, and then a smaller proportion on the HMRC website. And how do you promote the offer? Conversation with parents was the biggest one. Information given to parents, advertised on notice boards, etc. Was a scheme easy to sign up to, so the higher proportions were either very easy or relatively easy, so that was a positive. in terms of promoting the offer and hopefully using some case studies to promote the offer with providers that haven't signed up. And the scheme they felt was relatively easy, very easy or relatively easy to administer, which was positive. Next slide, please. Is there a next slide? Yeah, I think it's close to the finish now. Is the scheme very, yeah, we've done that one. Would you recommend this scheme to other providers? So the bulk of the majority said yes, which again is positive. What changes would you need? So 9 said no. The main thrust was around improved advertising and awareness. So I think this is the key theme coming through from all the surveys. And equally, a number of providers were prepared to have a discussion with us, further discussion. And I think that's it. Next slide, if there is one. No, that's it. Thanks, James.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Really fantastic. And I always say when we have an example from Birmingham, a big local authority, biggest local authority across Europe, which has its advantages in terms of scale and ability to do what you've done an amazing amount of actions as part of this project, for which Birmingham should be congratulated, many of which are replicable across other local areas. But you do have the advantage of scale, which of course is also a disadvantage in terms of the amount of work that you need to do and the number of providers and parents and families that you support. So yes, as Nicky Hirsch says in Islington, very bold Birmingham, thank you very much. Now I can see on the chat that we've got some questions about data, and I know that's going to come up later, so that's good. And we've deliberately not included the details about tax-free childcare in today's webinar, the hows, the wheres, the whats, because that was covered in the first webinar. So if you still need to think about how tax-free childcare actually works and some of the tools and resources, do visit that webinar recording and those resources. And we have put the link to that in the chat, but we will also send it out with the information that we send out as a result of today's session. So let's have a look at another theme then from this work, and that's approaches to stakeholder engagement. Obviously, a project like this, and you've heard it already, the importance of working with those that do have regular contact with families and parents, and the little bits that they can do as part of that jigsaw puzzle. So we have 3 approaches in terms of the things that we thought stakeholders need. So 3 things. First of all, making sure that they had information available, having it and sharing it. And there is a lot of information about tax-free childcare out there, but it's about having the right information and the information that connects with that stakeholder group and their constituency, you know, those families that they particularly work with. How does that information connect with them as effectively as possible? And then the second aspect is about supporting action. So not only understanding that information, but using it when working together with families. And then the third one, knowing where and how to refer and signpost. So we all have our limits. If we're doing knowing enough to get to parents and families to that particular point, where can they best go to understand the specifics for them and their family conditions? So information, action, and referral and signposting, really important strands in stakeholders' work. But of course, we need to think about the starting point. We must acknowledge where we start when we work with stakeholders. We're all busy, we have much to manage, and we have our priorities. Of course, tax-free childcare can support many of the outcomes and impacts that we're all aiming for in all work with families. So understanding and acknowledging that stakeholders have much to manage is really important, as is acknowledging that they vary widely. So from health to housing to social care, all big key statutory organisations and duties, but also we have voluntary organisations, community organisations as well. So key is building their confidence and understanding about tax-free childcare, but also what do they know already? What's their starting point and how does that vary? So that's our starting point in the next diagram. It's about how we move this continuum across from that initial assessment and over. So we start this process from the left-hand side. So that needs identification analysis is that initial assessment. It's when what we find out, what do stakeholders know, what's missing, what's needed, what do they think, feel and understand, but also have the discussion about what their views are about tax-free childcare, because they're not always helpful. Are they positive? Are they negative? Do they come from a particular viewpoint? So understanding that right at the beginning is completely vital, because then we can tailor and design information for all of them in response to that information. So it's information that speaks to them and the people that they're working with. And often here it's important that we do have a focus on quality information rather than quantity. It's very easy to overload our stakeholders with lots and lots of information, well-intended information, but it can overwhelm and it can overcomplicate the process. So one of the things we did in the last webinar was to try and simplify and streamline some of those messages in a clear way. So there's some useful resources there. Because the third aspect there is it is resources and tools for stakeholders make the difference, because having information isn't always enough. It's about how they put that information into practice. Things like social media assets, tools, resources, leaflets, little posters, flyers, emails, and that sort of context. And HMRC have developed a lot of those, and a lot of other information has been developed by other organisations too. So we've shared where you can find the resources and tools previously. But then some of your stakeholders will then want support. They'll want to make sense of the information. They might be active learners. They might want to workshop what that means for them and what might be possible. So that's where deeper engagement with stakeholders, not every stakeholder, but a smaller group of them. That's where that sort of dialogue and information exchange, workshops, attending team meetings, those sorts of things do make a big difference to putting that information into action. It's what turns an email into action, and that's vitally important. And then there's a much smaller input there, but vital as well for some, is intervention when stakeholders need it. When is signposted needing? What expertise do they need from you? Do you have family information colleagues, welfare support teams, other agencies that you can connect them together? So that's the key components for strategy for us. When we think on the next slide, I've got here some of the things, some of the outputs in the work with those 10 initial local authorities. We saw, and we've already heard from Birmingham, and we'll hear from the other local authority areas what they have done. But we've seen commonly a review of current information for stakeholders, looking at what information is being shared and how, when was it last shared, and what improvements through this new lens and this new focus could be identified. Stakeholder surveys and discussions. Kevin shared the results from his stakeholder surveys and discussions there, and they continue. Many local areas across the UK are still required to complete childcare sufficiency assessments regularly to identify the supply and demand in their local areas and the gaps and the needs for childcare development. And that's where including tax-free childcare in questions and surveys in that has revealed some of the results like Kevin suggested. But also, it's not just about questionnaires and surveys. Focus groups and discussions in forums and networks also help understand the barriers and take up and start to bring that written information to life and to be verbalized. And the more we can get people to verbalize and share information, accurate information, word of mouth, the more effective we will be in reaching as many people as possible. But of course, we're not asking people to add tax-free childcare onto already long to-do lists. We're showing and demonstrating how tax-free childcare helps and supports and adds value to other strategies and agendas, how this is an important jigsaw piece of everybody's puzzle when they're supporting families. And already we've heard how timely this project was. People are ready, willing and able to take another look at tax-free childcare, especially within the context of providers, costs to deliver early years in childcare, and everybody's views, thoughts and feelings about the cost of living. So people are looking, parents and families, seeking out ways in which they can get extra support and reduce their household bills. But also we've seen a lot of mapping as well, so identifying all of the stakeholders, and sometimes that surprised local areas, all the stakeholders that they have and where they actually might have a wide reach and a different type of stakeholder. The next slide talk about information. So we've seen some examples of where tax-free childcare has been included in local areas, local authorities, chief execs, blogs and emails, and communicates to all employees. Kevin made the point that Birmingham is a large local employer, and other examples have shown how they've reached the local authority workforce for tax-free childcare. The tax-free, our webinar materials and links and recording have been widely shared with family-facing professionals and other stakeholders. It's freely available to be showing at meetings or supporting people to watch it at their leisure when they're working from home or in their hot offices. But also, we've seen some short, smaller programs of tours going to emerging stakeholder groups and networks and forums, presenting at different team meetings virtually or in hybrid fashion, or indeed face-to-face. So another information slide next carries on those activities. So, you know, targeting employers, including the local authority and health, incorporating tax-free childcare to all sorts of stakeholder communication plans, sharing plans and documents with elected members and senior management and LA teams, really effective strategic link up there. Connecting with the Chamber of Commerce and business forums, and the resources we're sharing help you to do that, and sharing regular information and updates with senior management. And I think that's where data will be of interest to senior managers, who are always keen to see how they compare and contrast with other local areas. Next, we've got stakeholder resources and tools. So local areas have refreshed or created new materials for their stakeholders. They've shared the myriad of HMRC toolkits, assets and links, and ensured that directly the websites have been shared with stakeholders so that they can access Childcare Choices, which is the HMRC government website for tax-free childcare, access that directly. Shared the webinar materials and professional briefings, and used assets and created assets to use in social media tweets also. So finally, before we hand over to the example from Barnet, we've got workshops, briefings and drop-in signposting and outreach. So we've seen examples of workshops and training for stakeholders for more interpersonal engagement. We've seen briefings and drop-ins, so family information service colleagues, we've got them dropping in at events, sitting in job centres, meeting with job centre advisors. Important for the continuation of family solutions. Signposting, as we've identified in terms of organisations like Employers for Childcare, welfare teams, citizens advice, and that re-engagement with frontline services as they emerge from the first stages of, well, the first 2 years of the effects of the pandemic, as services start to become much more visible in face-to-face delivery. Okay, so next we hear briefly from Melinda from Barnet, who has no slides, so so we just have her on camera, but I can't see her quite yet.
Yeah, I am here, James. Thank you very much.
So how does that connect with your experience then, Melinda?
Okay, so good morning, everybody. Lovely to have so many people joining today. So my name is Melinda. I'm Strategy and Sufficiency Manager here in the London Borough of Barnet. So as part of this project, we looked at the following points where we were at the start, what we could do and how we could, what our final steps were when looking at involving our stakeholders. So where we were, we recognised that improvements were required in which to promote the tax-free childcare with our stakeholders, as well as, you know, open and honest. Most recently, our energy was on the raising for the 2-year-olds, and we may have the realisation that our tax-free childcare had dropped off of our radar. So this whole project has given us a chance to pick this back up and actually look at it as a short-term project in which to raise awareness. So we looked at what we could do and how we could achieve this in short, medium and long-term plans. And this allowed us to focus on different elements, what we needed to do and who could help us achieve that. Apologies, I am in the office, so there is some background noise. So we're quite busy today. So what we did, so we increased the promotion of tax-free childcare by using the existing established promotional materials through HMRC, and started to advertise through social media at early years events such as the many summer fairs and community events and school events. We updated our children's centres to ensure that the tax-free childcare element was at the forefront of all conversations with families when they were returning to work or take up adult learning opportunities. We updated our early help teams through the local authority hubs to alert them of the benefits and the opportunities for their families in accessing childcare funding support. We work alongside the Job Centre Plus, which has been very slow, as Barbara is aware, but is gradually picking up. So we can support mutual families in accessing the childcare funding, especially for those who are not entitled to the free childcare element because they do not meet the criteria. We also update some of our local authority comms to support our existing standard communications, such as our emails, our letters, to incorporate the tax-free childcare option, giving the link for those families that are unsuccessful in accessing free entitlements. So that's been a really good step forward because we're giving them an additional option. Please go onto this link and see whether you are entitled to it as an alternative. So the next steps on what we're looking to do going forward is to continue to have a better overview of the tax-free childcare by being promoting across Barnet through our stakeholder involvement. So widening that, going forward, thinking about who are actively involved and who we can then pull on board going forward. Continue to find new creative ways of promoting tax-free childcare with parents through alternative communication, so media, verbal, email, knowing our community, knowing our partners, what works best, building confidence in our partners when they are having conversations with parents around tax-free childcare, because I also think it's fell off of their radars as well. So it's about reinforcing that going forward. And finally, offering early years provider drop-in sessions to tap into, especially for those who are not registered to take tax-free childcare as a childcare option, and helping them with registration and getting them started as we move forward. That's pretty much where we are. Very big whistle-top tour, nothing like Kevin in Birmingham. But you know, this is just a small part of what we're doing here in Barnet alongside everything else. So, but please feel free to contact me out of this meeting if there's anything you need to know. Thank you, Barbara.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Melinda. It's really interesting to hear how Barnet have taken that stakeholder engagement work forward. And now we're just going to move on to how we've been working with providers to actively engage in the take up of tax-free childcare. I'm going to start up with a few slides just looking at some of the key issues, and then I'll be handing over to Carrie from Manchester about how they've taken it forward. So some of the things that we need to be thinking about, to be fair, this project, this focus on tax-free childcare could not come at a better time. I've already mentioned this, but increased cost of living, families needing and wanting new and different childcare following the impacts of the pandemic, sustainability issues for providers are also experiencing rising costs. So I really couldn't have come at a better time. But what prevents our providers from signing up? And on this next slide, we can see some of the key factors. It could be a lack of information. Kevin's slides from Birmingham, I think, identified some of these key issues. It could be lack of information, knowledge and low confidence. It could be that they think that the system is way too complicated and not sure how it works. And there can be concerns around waiting for payments, how they're going to be able to reconcile their payments against invoices. And all of these have solutions. Even where providers are not signed up, they may not be actively promoting or supporting tax-free childcare to their families and their prospective families. And the reasons for that may be very similar to some of these shown here. A question for all of you, I think, is have you asked your providers why they haven't signed up or why they're not promoting tax-free childcare if they have? We need to be selling the benefits to providers and recognise that supporting providers to be sustainable, especially in these challenging times, we're supporting our local authority sufficiency duty as well as supporting families that are experiencing financial difficulties. And we need to establish a starting point, and you will all be at different starting points. Some of the things you need to consider are taken from discussions held during the project and the action plans generated as a result of the Take 5 work here. And you can see these considerations for a needs analysis on this slide. And on the next slide, we can see some of the ideas that were generated from discussions and action plans with the local authorities that we have worked with to date. So thinking about what's on the local authority website, is there a link on the provider portal to a link to tax-free childcare information? Have you shared the webinar that we produced back in the spring with all of the materials that we've had? Are you sharing the materials from HMRC? And there are videos from HMRC. It's really worth looking at the assets that are on childcare choices. They have been updated and they are constantly refreshed. Are you including information on tax-free childcare in all of your early years entitlement work? But importantly also, because we tend to focus on the under fives, are we also communicating it to schools and to out of school and holiday activity provision, including the holiday activity and food programme? So where we need to be thinking about including information for providers. But we also have a number of resources and tools. And local authority plans also contain many actions focusing on better use of existing resource, not just considerations about developing new resources. Mentioned it earlier, case study examples, particularly when we're looking at engaging providers, are really, really useful. It isn't difficult to sign up. It isn't difficult to reconcile payments against invoices. And if we can have providers speaking to providers where they've had a positive experience, that can be really powerful. The survey materials, Kevin shared Birmingham survey, create testimonials and podcasts to promote to other providers. Thinking about refreshing our messages with an emphasis currently on supporting business sustainability and families. And thinking about other areas where we can incorporate sections on TFC, as we've heard from our previous two speakers, into briefings, ongoing information and guidance. And sharing TFC assets on social media. Social media is really a really important tool in this regard. There's also support and intervention when providers need it, as we talked about with our stakeholders. And one theme that runs through all plans is how TFC, tax-free childcare, can be incorporated into existing provider support, business and sustainability discussions and network meetings. Ensuring providers know where to go when they have questions is really important. And the HMRC webinar questions response is one quick win, the FAQs. So Do providers know where to go if they have a query? Do you have clear signposting routes to experts and support services when providers need assistance, or when providers are not able to provide the specific answers parents need? These are some of the things that we need to be thinking about. So I'm now going to ask Carrie from Manchester to share their experiences of supporting providers to actively engage. Over to you, Carrie.
Thanks. Thank you, Barbara. Should I have a slide? Thank you. Covered, but we welcome to promote tax-free childcare. We're very conscious of the fact that it perhaps kept slipping down the to-do list. That wasn't quite as high priority for us in Manchester as engagement and also take of 2-year-old funding, which is a huge focus on that. So, you know, the opportunity to have some dedicated time to focus on developing an action plan around raising our tax-free childcare claim numbers, you know, was welcomed, and we put, you know, time and resource aside to do that. The take, which has been described, was incredibly useful, a self-evaluation tool to assess where we currently were and what we thought our strengths and weaknesses were. And, you know, our scores varied across the leadership and buy-in, capacity of providers to promote. You know, we'd made some inroads in some of those areas, but actually didn't do what was revealed. So that started as our first point. Our starting point would be to consult with our daycare providers in the city. We didn't go out and do widespread surveying. We had a consultative group that was quarterly, and we brought those, they were coming together. So we consulted with that group and got a wide variety of different types of experiences and feedback. So the consultation with nurseries, the feedback varied. A high number of nurseries appeared to be signed up and registered to receive tax-free childcare, but took very different approaches to promoting it to their families. Some had built that into their induction processes, their show-arounds for new families, and there were regular reminders throughout the child's initial journey into the nursery and throughout the nursery experience, where key workers even would perhaps have those conversations with parents. There was signage in the nurseries, and as a result, nurseries that described that type of seemed to have a higher rate of participation, and they also had a slicker system in their reconciliation of those payments and didn't have too many grumbles, although there were some suggestions that sometimes parents found the process a little bit complicated to set up. Our focus initially was on the daycare providers. Other feedback from providers was that whilst they had registered, they had done not much more to promote it actively to parents. If a parent had asked about tax-free childcare, they would be able to say they were registered and you know, help them to find them on the Childcare Choices website. But beyond that, it wasn't actively promoted. So we knew we had some work to do around that. What we felt, or the feedback we were getting, was that for those that lacked that confidence, that it was particularly around supporting the parents and understanding who was entitled to it, and perhaps that they may be on different types of benefits that may not always be consistent, or they may be better off on a different claiming in a different way. And so there was some anxiety around that, and again, it didn't seem to be a priority. We also identified a lack of awareness beyond our childcare settings with other stakeholders. We didn't feel that tax-free childcare had the same level of awareness across the local authority or with providers. So, oh, sorry, not providers, with partners. So we determined to take that, you know, the opportunity to raise the awareness further. Next slide, please. So we went back to basics. And as a result of the information that we gleaned from the webinars and also from the action learning set, we put together some really basic information really to remind our daycare providers and all our schools of the benefits of registering for tax-free childcare. We thought we would start at the very beginning and encourage everybody to addressing the cost of living crisis that they could assist their families with, but equally support them as businesses and schools to offset costs that may be rising. So, this was an opportunity, and we believe that, this was a useful tool to share at this time and to remind people. We provided the information, which was particularly useful, the Employers for Childcare leaflet, and we signposted everybody, all our providers in schools, to use their free advice helpline, because we thought that would remove the anxiety that nurseries and schools, and the time commitment perhaps, of supporting parents in navigating, their entitlements. So I made contact with the Employers for Childcare scheme advice. I was going to promote this quite heavily, and I did feel that their service could potentially contribute quite significantly to families in Manchester, and would they have the capability or capacity to respond to that, which they said they would. So we have been pushing the Employers for Childcare advice helpline quite heavily in Manchester. We also circulated the promotional materials, the social media assets and posters, which we previously, shared posters, but we'd done a light touch thing. But here we were encouraging how those things could be used. We did a similar promotion to employers, slightly different wording, encouraging them, to have those conversations with their staff, their workforce, and how this might be, again, something of assistance to all the workforce. We shared through our family poverty strategy. This is key partners, health, housing, and the university's Job Sense Plus, and all social care colleagues. And we'll continue to raise that profile with them. And in addition, we thought we'd target more targeted families, taking on board the point as well around just for early years. This is, an extended benefit for families of children aged up to, 17 at its maximum. So we wanted to reach out, and we raised the profile with our local SEND team. And we're also reaching out to community groups who've worked with Pakistani and Bangladeshi community. We've had some success with them in raising awareness around other childcare funding. Next slide, please. This is early days. We haven't bombarded our nurseries, with requests for information. And I do think the point that have been made in the chat around data, having timely data from the source around what's happening in your city is really important, and helps us to monitor, what the impact of our actions are. But the initial findings are that Employers for Childcare report a marked increase in calls from Manchester residents in the last 2 months. We've also seen a notable increase in the engagement from our primary schools. I've had a number of emails into my inbox from schools that I don't generally deal with. I'm not especially involved with the primary schools. It's not really my remit. But they've contacted me to say, well, I've got a dormant registration. How do I, activate this? And what we've done is we've put them up with schools that are more actively engaged and claiming tax-free childcare and receiving tax-free childcare. That seems to be working quite well. We've also improved our messaging to the out-of-school networks that exist in the city. And generally, we are taking the message out through more forums, in more bulletins. It's, reaching out to the employers and the Chamber of Commerce. Final slide, please. There is more to do, of course. This is the tip of the iceberg. It's about embedding these messages and embedding this in our approach. What we'd like to see next is development of case studies, both how this is of benefit to families, individual families, perhaps accessing out of school, so different bespoke responses to people who've decided to claim tax-free childcare, and also the benefits that some nurseries and other entities. We will continue to refresh our communication strategy. We've done that initial big push, but actually our website will need some improvement. We start ball rolling there, and there is scope for other comms to be going out that we'll look to piggyback onto. We will have a closer focus on the HMRC data, which we're more familiar with now. We're looking at that, but I think it'll take time for us to see the impact of the activities we've taken in early summer. We'll follow up the daycare settings and survey them later in the year to see what their wins are or where they're still struggling. And we'll obviously mop up with consultation with all working families as best as we can. That's a whistle stop, so I hope that's been of some use.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Carrie. Really good to see that. And conscious of the time, I'm going to go on now to strategies to support families to understand tax-free childcare and apply for it. I'm just going to whistle through a few slides. I'm going to hand over to Sassy from Brent to give us a very brief update of some of the work that Brent have been doing. But this is the last of our 3 strands, if you like, families. And if we look at the key issues, you will probably have noticed, or you may have noticed, that take-up of tax-free childcare is steadily growing. It was 328,000 families in December 2021, and it's risen to 512,000 families, so another 130,000 accessing by May 2022. But it still means there's somewhere around 800 families that are eligible that are not taking up, so there's a lot of scope. So what are the barriers? Some of these are similar to those that you'll see for providers. Lack of information, perception it's not worth applying for, thinking that they won't be eligible for tax-free childcare, thinking if they get 30 hours childcare, they can't get tax-free childcare. So lots of different barriers, all of which we can tackle with targeted messaging and communication. So if we look at the next slide, a number of you have mentioned this in the chat so far. The starting point is really to try and understand parental current take-up so that we can start to target some of our work. Data is available around take-up of tax-free childcare. You have a link in the slides which will be coming out to you, and I know a colleague, thank you, has also put the link into the chat. What this will do is to show you open and used accounts for families with self-employed parent, for disabled children, by UK regions, by child age, and it breaks down annual numbers of families with used accounts by authority, by Westminster constituency, etc. So have a look at that data because it is useful as a starting point, albeit we need to recognise that any impacts from things that we do now to support take-up will take some time to show through. So we need to be thinking about how we promote tax-free childcare to parents because that is absolutely key. We need to, so we could think about, for example, incorporating tax-free childcare into response letters and emails to families who apply for but are eligible for the 2-year-old entitlement. We could add information to FIS and local authority email signatures with a short explanation or a link to the childcare calculator and childcare choices for those families that can self-serve. There are resources and tools that we have available to us to support this. I cannot reiterate enough, case studies work. If I have the next slide, please, Seth. Case studies work. Think about developing those case studies, signposting to links and supporting guidance. Peer-to-peer support, word of mouth, positive feedback is really, really powerful. And again, look at the assets that are available on the HMRC website because they are really useful. And the childcare choices cost calculator is really important because it will support parents to make decisions and it's not just limited to tax-free childcare. We also need to think about support and intervention where it's needed. So thinking about signposting to support or reassurance, where are the touch points? This brings us back round to key stakeholders and providers because that's often the key touch point for parents who need support and intervention. So now I'm going to be asking Sassy, who's our final local authority speaker, to outline their strategy to support families to understand tax-free childcare and apply for it. Thank you, Sassy.
Hi everyone, my name is Sassy Srinivasan and I'm Early Years Manager at Brent Council, and one of the advantages or pitfalls, as one may see it, of being the last speaker in a really content heavy webinar like this one has been is that just about most things that I'm going to say have been said already, either by HEMSOS or by local authority colleagues. We went through a very similar journey to what others have reported back. So please, could we move to the next slide. So when I got the email from HempSource, and of course we love to hear from them, but my heart did sink because I thought, here is yet another thing that Brent are quite low on nationally. Our take up of the other entitlements is very low, and it didn't come as a surprise to us when we were contacted by HempSource to say we were also low on the take up of tax-free childcare. And so we completed the Take 5 document. We have completed that in the past when we were very low on the 2-year entitlement. And much as others have said, you know, it forced us to step back and think about tax-free childcare. We knew that we had senior leadership support. They're very keen for us to do better, and but we then said, what have we done? What are our providers doing? And we weren't confident really in any of those. And we knew that we hadn't been paying the same attention to tax-free childcare because we focused on the other entitlements. Next slide, please. So we were one of those local authorities that scored ourselves quite low on the outset of the Take 5 document. So then we said, what shall we do? So we knew we had a big piece of work to do with our providers. We knew that we probably needed to do a big push with parents and carers. And much as others have said, we started with colleagues in the council. So we created a flyer, which I'll show you later, which we worked with comms. We tried to get it distributed by individual directors, but comms then decided to add it in a weekly email, staff email that goes to all staff. And so everybody had the flyer because, just like many others have said, we linked it to the cost of living. And one of the things that I think became blindingly aware was many people are just still not aware of tax-free childcare. And I spoke to a number of colleagues who had children in that age range who were really surprised that there was something that went up to the age of 11. They said, but we thought everything stops with 2, 3 and 4. And they were very pleasantly surprised to find that this could see them through until their child turned 11. So we made a plan, an immediate plan through on how to promote both to people we work with and to wider population, and also how do we put in place systems so that it didn't stop just with this little time limited exercise, but that our promotion was going to continue. And we found those examples that were provided by Employers for Childcare in the HempSource webinars so useful, because you just need to look at them, and those 3 or 4 examples that were there to see what a benefit and how much of a saving it is for families. And that's also been the reaction when I've spoken to individuals and saying, did you know about it? And they are so pleasantly surprised. Next slide, please. So our work with providers, coincidentally, alongside this, us being approached earlier this year, we had decided to run what we called a business sustainability program for a series of 10 workshops for providers across the year. And it was all about supporting their business sustainability. And it started with the recruitment and retention issue that we all know is a huge problem. But we said, we know the DfE are beginning to look at it, but what can we do at a local level? And actually recruitment and retention, it's difficult to get staff, but there's also a lot of other things maybe we could support them with. So we have 10 workshops. And so we knew that these tax-free childcare sessions were coming up. So we signposted our providers to the ones in March, and a number of them attended. And then we did our own follow-up. So one of our workshops was called Help with the Costs of Childcare, to enable our providers to have those conversations. So when a parent comes and says, I don't think I can afford this, that they could actually talk to them in an informed way about universal credit or about tax-free childcare, to make sure the parent was fully aware of what was available, and then they could make that informed choice. So we did this. We had a colleague from one of our community hubs who came and spoke to providers about universal credit, and then we did a presentation on tax-free childcare as a follow-up to what HempSource did, and people found that really helpful and really useful. Next slide, please. So this, I'm conscious that this looks really small, so you're not going to be able to see what it says, but this is the flyer that we produced. So basically it says, did you know that there's such a thing as tax-free childcare? So, you know, you may need it, or someone you know may need it. And that's just about all of us, really. Even if we don't have children in that age range, we for sure will know someone who does. And so this is, and it tells people how much they could save. So we put in the basic blurb about tax-free childcare, included the employers with childcare examples, and the other information that would be relevant, and this is what we're sending out. We also use social media. Next slide, please. That's our, so we've been running it. We're not allowed to, sadly, have our own early years Brent account, so we have to use the Brent Council one, and so it's limited when we can post. There's controls everywhere, but whenever we get a chance, we do, and this is one of the examples of our social media post. Next slide, please. So these were, this is feedback from two of our providers. So one is trying and has put the link to explain, but hasn't had any success. And another says that they have high numbers of parents using it, and they're continuing to spread the word, and it's really successful. And hopefully we're going to keep in touch with our providers to encourage anybody who isn't registered yet. But I think most of our providers are, but we'll continue to work with them to make sure that number's increasing. And then one of my colleagues, one of our team members, reported back about recently taking a number of calls from parents who were not eligible for the 2-year entitlement, not high earners, but just above the threshold, but they were signposted to tax-free childcare, and that would be really useful for them. Next one, please. So yes, so what we've also done the same reflections. How can we put in place a system that rolls on of promotion of tax-free childcare? So we're looking at, as Barbara said, we're looking at including it in our emails. We any team meeting we attend, we do regular team meetings with our social care colleagues, looking at vulnerable children and take up. We make sure tax-free childcare gets included in that, and generally within the council increases. Awareness has been increased. Our chief exec does a video message. She's actually talked about tax-free childcare there. And yeah, refresh of, we're going to keep in touch with providers, as I said, just to keep tax-free childcare on the radar for them. Next one, please. So we're as part of our business support, we are going to make sure that providers are making, if they're registered for tax-free childcare, they're making it explicit on their website. We will continue our promotion across the council with partners. We've been running the Parent Champion scheme for a number of years, so through them, and our own outreach across the borough. And what do we need? A lot of you have talked about data and specific data in the chat, and I think colleagues covered in their presentations. And for we too, because it's hard to measure yourself when you don't know how many people are eligible. When I looked at the March stats, I could see we'd gone up a bit, but we then have no context to compare it with. And if it were possible to split it, down by ward, that would be hugely useful, because then, we could target our work rather than spread it everywhere. We could be focused. And that was it from me. That was galloping through, but yes.
Thank you very much, Sassy. Time has defeated us. We're at the end of today's session. There's a few things that I will say. I picked up on the chat that the drop down on the evaluation may only include English local authorities, which is a terrible oversight if that's the case, and we will make an adjustment to the survey straight away. The evaluation link has been put in the chat, so please do use that. And if you look out for the recording and the slides that we'll send out later, the evaluation link will be on there. and I'll make sure that it's got the correct drop down on local authorities. Many of you have asked about data, and that's issued quarterly by HMRC. So the next data drop is due very soon, so look out for that. HMRC are very aware that many of you would really like the lists again of providers who are signed up to Tax-Free Childcare, and they are looking at that and looking at how they may improve data in the future. We've already shared the link to the last webinar, which I think you'll find useful as well if you've not already identified that. And once we've finished wrapping up this project, we'll be discussing with HMRC if we share the Take 5 document a little more widely. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much to all local authorities and colleagues from across the UK, including Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales and England. Thank you today for Carrie, Sassy, Kevin and Melinda. Your case studies really did bring to life the things that we've been saying and the experience of this project, and it was great to see how connected and common they were in their findings. Thank you to Denise, Barbara and Jo, who acted as advisors for this project, and to Jo for her project management leadership of it. Thank you to HMRC for funding the work over the past 6 or so months. And thank you everybody for attending today. Thank you very much and have a good rest of the day. Goodbye.